Hey everyone, welcome to episode 27 of The Followers, and this week we're back with another guest for you. Today we have Louise Keane with us, and she's coming to us today to chat to us about her experience working in the GAA in a very kind of unique kind of a role up to this point. She's a strength and conditioning coach, but she's also involved in the new sports science development program there that the GAA have set up. So without me kind of butchering it too much, Louise, I'll leave you take over from here and give us a little bit of a background on you, what started you off on this route, and maybe right up to where you are currently.
Yeah, perfect. I suppose I'll start with education. So I started my education in Dundalk IT, so I did health and physical activity there as my bachelor's degree for 4 years. And really, I suppose at that time I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I kind of went into that course, I suppose, unsure, but knowing that I had an interest in sport and in activity and stuff like that. So went into that role, and during my third year, I think it was third year, we did an internship. So we had to do like a 12-week placement, fairly common. And I did mine with Kildare GA, actually with Julie Davis, who was the S&C coach for the Kildare teams. And that really, I suppose, was where my interest in S&C started. I finished that, ended up being with them for the year. And after that decided, gonna go follow the S&C route. So I went and did my master's in strength and conditioning over in Edinburgh, in the University of Edinburgh. And I finished that. I came home and kind of just been working since. So when I came home first, it was kind of, it's hard, I suppose, when you finish your college experience and looking to try and get into the professional sport or trying to get into sport in general. So I worked with my local team, so I worked with Kilcock first, and then that kind of grew and started working with other teams around the area. And I started working Maynooth University in the sports centre in there just as a sports attendant. And that kind of led then to other little bits and pieces. I've worked kind of with a good few teams alongside doing that. And then ended up working as a GPO with Kildare, initially part-time, so I was still working in the University of Maynooth. I was still working with a few teams. I was probably working about 5 jobs all at the same time. And eventually then from working as a GPO part-time, that went into a full-time role. And then I moved over to Sligo as a performance GDA last year.
Loads to dig into there, Louise. I think one of the first things you want to touch on is your degree was in the health and physical activity. Was there much kind of exposure to strength and conditioning from there, or was it something you were aware of before you went into that internship with Kildare and Julie Davis?
No, it was more geared towards health promotion, special populations. So really, I didn't really even know what strength and conditioning was, to be completely honest, going into that internship. It was just an opportunity that came up, and I said, interest in GA. I've played it all my life. Let's go down that route and see what happens. And it was really only through that experience that I really learned what S&C was, and it was an incredible environment to be in. That was, I think, 2012. So it was probably 4 or 5 years into McGeeney being with Kildare. You were in that environment, surrounded by, top class footballers and a top class strength and conditioning coach, which, obviously had a big impact on me, and probably the fact Julie being female as well, which I probably wouldn't have realised at the time, but would have had a big impact as well. So really it was kind of, I suppose, a little bit of luck, and then just being impacted by the situation and by the people in the environment, really.
Julie's Marma, is it?
Yeah, she's from Armagh. Was with McGeeney for his whole time in Kildare, and is strength and conditioning coach with Armagh now.
And when you started picking up the bits on S&C, and I assume would have started looking into it more in your own free time, just going back to your degree, did you ever at times think, do you know, some of the S&C principles could actually be really beneficial for, not just for elite or reasonably elite athletes, it could actually be really beneficial for people's general health then as well? Have you ever tried to look at combine the two in any aspects?
Yeah, actually, probably more so now. Like when I went into S&C first, it was very much like, yeah, I want to work with S&C, and kind of almost probably disregarded the, personal trainer. We're working with general population kind of clients. But the more, I suppose, now I am in that setting, I could appreciate probably more the overall role as well, that even just sport in general is playing for people's health, and the importance of that, and the importance, even regardless of what your sport is, but staying in sport to be physically active and to be healthy, not just to compete and to win. So yeah, it's probably something that I think about more now than I would have then.
I think everyone kind of goes through that phase. Like when you first get into S&C, you're like, right, I want to deal with the very elite, and you focus on like the very niche areas of kind of like really specifically into, say, something like acceleration mechanics. And then the more you do it, the more you realize like it's the overall aerobic capacity that's going to make 90% of the difference. So it's nearly, obviously there will be differences between working with elite level athletes and regular population, but there's still, the core principles are always still going to be the same.
Yeah, exactly. Like the basics don't change regardless of who you're working with. If somebody is starting in S&C and they're training age of 0, it doesn't matter what actual age they are, they're starting at the same point. So it doesn't really change until you get really to that top end, as you said. And even in Gaelic games, I don't know if we ever really get to that top end, even with our intercounty players. Like, we kind of seem to have this idea that, there's no difference between an intercounty player and a player in a professional sport at elite level. And, there's still quite a bit of a difference there. Like,
I think the difference is even there sometimes, like more often than you'd think at the beginning, is more around recovery management and nearly getting them to stop doing things rather than getting them to like extra tiny little drills while they're at home.
yeah, exactly. Like, the recovery is totally different. Even just by the travel that they have to do, working, and they're always trying to do more, and it's just not always better. Like,
That's very much the conversation I find with intercounty athletes. I suppose over the last 2 or 3 years, is that it's how can I get that extra 1%? And it's never, when you bring the conversation back to recovery. Just, it could be just something as simple as, take a look at your sleep schedule and just maybe looking to try and put a bit of structure on that, and that kind of almost gets glazed over. Have you any kind of I don't know, maybe learned experiences where you maybe steps that you follow when you're talking to athletes in that regard, that to begin the education process around what I suppose recovery kind of is, and what actually competing at a top level entails, especially when that's not I suppose the sexy side of sport.
yeah, like I think they kind of automatically even go into protein shakes and what supplements can I take, instead of just nailing the basics of getting 8-9 hours sleep a night, and eating the right foods at the right times and getting hydration. And I think, like, we're lucky here in that we've two brilliant nutritionists as well, that they kind of really take a load of that kind of side of things. But it's just trying to, I think, educate them mostly, that these basic things are the things that are going to help you the most, and trying to create habits around those so that they are getting that sleep that they need, and making sure that they're drinking water, and tracking it is something I've found helpful, for players that are struggling with it, to just get them to write down how many hours sleep they get at night, how much they're drinking each day, what they're eating after a training session, before training, just that they start to notice it themselves, like, oh God, I've actually only got 5 hours sleep tonight. Like, it's just small little things, but if they notice it themselves, it's a little bit easier to then, they kind of get that, all right, yeah, that makes a bit more sense.
Without actually
Really
making a
interesting to watch
specific commitment to get better at something. Just by being aware of it, you're more like, oh, I'm sleeping terribly, I need to do something about this. And you're not kind of setting them a challenge or saying, I need you to get this. Just see what you're doing there. I'd often find the same with food. People are saying, should I start tracking my calories in my fitness pal? Yeah, try it. Like, it's a good learning experience. And how much you're eating doesn't matter. Just see what you're eating, and it'll tell you so much.
Yeah.
And you learn so much from doing that for 10 days or 2 weeks. Then you can start looking to set targets after that. But just have an idea where you're starting from can be a huge help.
Yeah, and I think they know more than maybe even we give them credit for. Like, if they see that stuff on paper, they'll automatically start making those changes themselves without even needing you to tell them. It's just that awareness.
It creates great autonomy then for the athlete, and that it's their choice and they're a bit more motivated to do it themselves because it's their own decision and they're not being forced by anyone else. Louise, you've worked with a good few teams over the years, both between like male and female, intercounty and club. Without giving too much away, in case you're like had to sign any confidentiality agreements, can you give us like any bits you notice between like differences between club and county, or even between male female, not just in terms of like physical attributes, but just in the way kind of behaviors or stuff they maybe set up for themselves within their group and that?
Yeah, I suppose looking at male and female, there's probably not massive differences. It's probably smaller things. Like in terms of how they train and stuff like that, it would all be fairly similar. It's more what I've found with female players, they're more interested in why they're doing things. They'll ask more questions, and once they understand why they're doing it, that's when you'll get the buy-in from them. Where with male players, it's kind of a case of you can tell them what to do, and for the most part, they'll go and do it. But the education side for me is really important. So even if they're not looking for that, it's still educating them so that they, when they're not in that environment or when you're not there, that they still know what to do and when to do it. But yeah, I suppose with females, it's definitely something that I think that comes more naturally. Like, they're less likely to just go do it because they're told to go do it. They'll look for that information first. And then between club and intercounty, I think it's probably, a lot of club teams now are coming up to that level. Like, that gap is probably closing quite a bit. But it's probably appreciating, it's more from a coaching point of view, just appreciating that, they're not, they don't need to have the same level of commitment as maybe an intercounty player that you're expecting from an intercounty player. And you probably have less hands-on time with them. It might be, giving them programs and trusting them to do it a little bit more, and understanding that some players won't do it. So it's more little things. I think the bigger things, no more than training between, general population and between athletes, the principles are staying the same. It's just small things that you're kind of tweaking.
That gap between intercounty and club, there's probably a few factors contributing to that close, and that you've county players coming back and drip feeding stuff back. You often have a lot of club players who are probably in with development squads over years and picked up stuff that way because they're being fed a good bit of information around that. But also because some are so eager to improve themselves, they're going out and seeking information and bringing it back. Have you found like that one is contributing more, or is it a lot of factors?
Yeah, I think it is. There's probably a lot to it. And if you're on an intercounty panel and you're consistently there, you've definitely got that drive and that commitment level to be there. And then, players do, well, at least you hope that those players bring that back to their club, and they're kind of improving the standards of the club player, and bringing up the expectation around the team and around all the players within it. So it's probably a bit of both. But you'd hope that loop that is there, is bringing on both teams.
I think where you say there, kind of the way you kind of get more of an education side when you're dealing with female athletes, and the male athletes just tend to do what you say. From what I've seen, when kind of a female, say if we have a female intercounty player and she goes back to her club, I find she's much better able to drip feed to other players in the squad because she knows why she's doing something. And then I feel on the other side is where the trouble comes, because when a male player goes back and he says, okay, well, I did this and it worked for me, and then everybody's doing that the exact same thing, but they don't know why and they don't know what they're trying to achieve from it. Whereas in the other position, if a female athlete comes back and says, I did this, but this is why you should probably do it this way instead, because that'll work for you. Have you found much of that?
It's not something I've noticed actually, but it's a really good point. And probably comes back to communication. Girls are more likely to talk about that kind of stuff, and probably just in general, just chat. Where lads might be talking kind of less in depth, kind of about what they're doing, and there's definitely that element of just because it's worked in one situation or it's worked for a certain amount of players, that if we take it in here and everybody does it, it's definitely going to work for us. But, it's like, as you said, it's not a one size fits all approach. So you have to kind of tailor it. And, girls are probably, well, if they're explaining to each other why they're doing things, they know if something's not going to work for them or if it is going to work. So yeah, that's definitely, I haven't kind of experienced it too much, but it definitely makes sense. Like,
so I think obviously this is a very generalised approach, but when you kind of look at it in the grand scheme of things, you add an intercounty player or say an international standard in a rugby squad into a club side, I feel in the female sphere it'll make a much bigger difference than if you did the same thing for a male team.
Yeah, probably so, yeah.
Orla would have said similar a couple of weeks ago, the females tend to be so much more around, why are we doing this? And what's the reasoning behind this way over this way and stuff, that really seems to be more of an eagerness to understand it all. You had something very interesting there, two kind of roles in around the same time, that you were working with players from both Mayo and Sligo at the same time, but they were the Mayo and Sligo players who were based in Dublin. That's a real interesting role. And I think it's certainly something that doesn't happen in many setups, because so many players from particularly the west of Ireland live and work in Dublin throughout the week and they still want to get sessions in and they're semi-collective. I think that's an interesting role. Can you give us some info on that?
Yeah, so it was actually at the same time, just by pure fluke, but I think it was maybe 2016. There was about 5 Mayo ladies players working, whether they were in college, whatever, living in Dublin, and that they were training kind of twice a week together in Dublin. And then this kind of the same with Sligo. So there was a group of Sligo players that were training in Dublin, working, living, studying there. So it was really just doing gym sessions with both. So for the most part, they were traveling up and down for their pitch sessions or traveling to like a central location around Athlone. And they were let do their gym sessions over in around Dublin. But both camps wanted their players to be supervised, which was great. So it was really just a case of supervising those sessions and making sure they were, weren't going to cause themselves any injuries or anything like that. But like programs and everything were done up by their S&C coaches. So it was really just implementing it.
Was the new centre in Abbottstown built at that stage, or was it just finding gyms whenever you could?
Yeah, so the Sligo men, they were using that facility that was up and running, and the Mayo ladies were using Santry, the athletic track out there. They have a small gym in it as well, so they were using that.
Just wondering there, just on while you were just overseeing and kind of implementing the program and making sure they were following things as well as they should, did you have any opportunity then to maybe add influence to the programming from what you were seeing develop in front of you, or how did it work from such a, I suppose, an unusual situation of training them over in Dublin?
Yeah, so like if things needed to be tweaked or whatever, you could kind of do that. Probably more so with the Sligo side. I kind of had more of a relationship with the strength and conditioning coach there. Mark Fitzharris was the S&C coach at the time, and he's from Kildare as well, so I kind of knew him a little bit. So there was a lot more communication there, and the trust was there that if there was something that needed to be tweaked or adapted or fixed or whatever, that that could happen. There was probably less communication with the Mayo side, but it wasn't a big deal in terms of the girls knew what they had to do, and they had, this wasn't something that was new to them. They'd been training for a while. They were really committed to what they were doing. And really it was minor fixes on technique more so than anything. And just listening to their bodies, and if they were sore or whatever, you could kind of work with that and change things as needed. But there wasn't too much because essentially they were well trained and well educated on what they were doing.
It's interesting.
Did you link in much with the rest of the management, say the manager of the team, or was it largely keep attendance, tell them that they're turning up and they're putting in good effort, or is there kind of much open conversations around it all?
There wasn't too much really. I think once they knew that the players were training and that they were working hard and who was there, they were happy enough. So there wasn't massive communication in terms of me communicating with them. But then they saw the players, still 3 times a week. So, if they had issues or they had questions, they were probably more inclined to be talking to the players anyway. So it probably wasn't too big an issue.
Were they loading most of their pitch sessions around the weekend then, or did they travel home or halfway home during the week much?
Both travelled halfway home during the week and then travelled home again on the Friday and then had their session as well, probably Sunday, with games and stuff. There would have been more with the Sligo lads. I think they did some pitch work up in Abbottstown, but for the most part they were travelling anyway, so they'd get most of their load done with the team.
I suppose, as we just talked about, the small things that we might be more inclined to chat with athletes about, like recovery and that, it's definitely, I suppose, an added hurdle there for some teams to have to cover that kind of distance, just due to, just the way the country is with jobs and so much being focused in on Dublin. Did you find, I suppose, just from your experience, that many players kind of struggled with that, distance to have to cover for training so often, or was it kind of just almost like a training adaptation that they got used to?
Yeah, it's definitely something that's a big challenge, I think, for counties this side of the country. Like, we probably don't appreciate it, even around Kildare, around Dublin, Carlow, these areas where they're not having to travel very far, where we have lads travelling 2.5 hours for a training session on a Friday evening before work and rush hour traffic. And it's definitely something that's probably not appreciated as much over in the east of the country because we don't know any better, really. It's not our experience, so we don't kind of fully appreciate it. To be honest, with players, I've not heard them complain too much about it. It's just a case of, this is what we have to do and we go and do it. Probably personally watching them doing it, I was more kind of in awe of what they were doing as opposed to them kind of passing any heed to it. It was just, this is what we do, and they go and do it. But it definitely has to have an impact on their bodies. Like, the amount of time they sit in a car before training and then getting home really late, eating, going to bed, getting up in the morning, going to work, like, their own personal time is definitely taking a hit on that. On recovery time is taking a hit. So it's definitely something that has a big impact, I think. We probably just don't know how much.
Is it worth it in terms of performance? Like, are some of those group collective sessions, are they worth putting on for the benefit you get out with the probably, I suppose, limited recovery from it and the fatigue, that extra fatigue it brings?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know, to be honest. There's probably some times where we're going, maybe we have to just let them recover and we'll get more benefit out of them then when they do get that recovery. I don't know, maybe the whole COVID situation might slightly change that in some ways, and that we now have a grasp that actually we can do things away from the pitch. You'd like to think there'll be that kind of perspective there. Whether that'll happen when we actually get back on the field, who knows? But I think, like, even the fact that those teams were using training and gym sessions and letting them do that and where they were, that's a step. And I suppose it depends on how many players you have for a pitch session is probably a little bit different. It impacts it differently, but definitely something to look at and see.
Yeah, you definitely hope now with people becoming more au fait with the technology side of things, with Zoom, making things more accessible, that tactical stuff, team play, discussions and all can be done online of a Tuesday night. Do your gym session from 7 to 8, then all of us need to be on Zoom from 8:30 to 9, as opposed to everyone meeting and then sitting in the meeting, then you're hopping in your car at 9:30 to drive 2.5 hours. Hopefully that comes in more and more and more where necessary in those longer distances. Your current role, Louise, is with Sligo GAA, Performance GDA. That's something that's come in a few counties. I know Young County, I think, were one of the earlier to bring it in. They had a part-time a few years ago and then have since had two kind of evolutions of it with the different roles, but quite a few have brought it on now. In your role with Sligo, how long?
I'm in my role since November 2019, so a little over a year.
Okay, so Performance GDA, what is, just first of all, that specific task, and then we'll talk a bit more about GDA versus GPO, your previous role and stuff, but Performance GDA, what does that involve?
Yeah, so I suppose there is a few kind of around the counties, and they're probably slightly different between different counties. So here in Sligo, basically my role is to look after the areas of strength and conditioning, physiotherapy, nutrition, and performance analysis within the county. So I oversee those 4 areas, from basically the whole player pathway of talent academies from under 14 right the way up, including senior level. And then I would also have reach out towards the clubs, so mostly kind of coach education in with the clubs. And yeah, so it's probably more around academies and senior squads, and overseeing those 4 areas. So with the S&C, I would be a lot more hands-on, being an S&C coach. And then with the other 3 areas, it's kind of making sure that there's people in place to look after those things, and you're just kind of overseeing it and making sure everything's running smoothly, making sure that they're kind of following the structures that are being put in place.
That's a very interesting area. And do you find it in your experience so far that each one of those areas kind of link in very well together through you, or do you feel like they're still a little bit clunky off each other, or how have you found each area of performance kind of coming in under this new position that you have?
It's starting to knit together, but there's still you're still trying to bring everything together. I suppose that's just something that takes time. Like we have a structure now in place where we have a nutritionist for our senior teams, and then we have a nutritionist for our development squads. We have an S&C coach with our senior footballers and our under 20 footballers, and then I'm looking after the S&C with the hurlers and with the development squads. We have a kind of physiotherapy link kind of put in place now that, the senior teams have their physios, but we have a clinic kind of set up for the development squads that their game days are covered, but then there'll be a clinic there that if a development squad player needs to see a physio, they're all seeing the same physio, and we have that information kind of kept together. So they're slowly starting to come together, and it's trying to bring all those different pieces together now as well, that there's communication between them all, where necessary, and just to kind of make things smoother. But we're slowly getting the structure in place, and I think once we have that kind of set, the rest of it hopefully will just develop over time.
I was going to say that structure is really key in terms of like you talking to the senior football S&C, the under 20 football S&C, and then making sure that what they hope to implement, or particularly in a couple of years' time, that when the minors, the under 16s, under 14s, what they're doing now and you're leading with them feeds into what the 20 seniors will do next year, 3 years' time, 5 years' time, all like that, and having that overall plan there.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I suppose for the last number of years with the senior S&C, there's kind of been a different S&C coach in, kind of maybe over 4 years, there was probably about 4 different S&C coaches. So we now have Sean Boyle in place there who's steady with them. And when I suppose it's a very young Sligo team at the minute, so lads were coming in and he was really still having to do the basics with them. So now we kind of have something that if they're getting their S&C the whole way up through the development squads, and then they're coming into under 20, but basically there's a pathway there that when they get to senior level, if they get to senior level and they go into the senior team, that they're at a certain level already, that they're not starting from the ground again. Obviously you're going to have players outside of that coming in from the clubs as well. So hopefully we can educate coaches and work with club players as well, so that it's not just something that's being reached to academies and to under 20s and to senior players, but it's also reaching out to the clubs, and hopefully, it's bringing up the level across the board.
One of the things that I'm just kind of thinking about there with this position, was this something that was pitched to the Sligo County Board, or was this something that the Sligo County Board kind of thought of by almost kind of by themselves? They're like, yeah, but this is something we need to put in place, and then they went out looking, or how did it come about? Just, I suppose my thinking behind this is that every county board seems to operate quite a bit differently to each other, and it's interesting to see it pop up kind of sporadically. So how did it kind of come about in your experience?
Yeah, so I think there was kind of certain individuals within Sligo and probably within the county board that kind of identified the need for it. And it kind of came from there, but it's kind of popping up sporadically around the place. I know from the Talent Academy report that was done last year, one of the recommendations was for each county to have kind of either a head of S&C or a performance GDA or whatever kind of the job title might be, but somebody that looks after that area. So I do think it's something that is coming down the line, that more counties will come up, in more counties where it's feasible to do it. So it's definitely something that's growing, and hopefully there can be a structure put on it that it will be slightly different in each county, but that the basics of it are still the same, and that it follows the pathway and follows the principles of the GAA.
There are iterations in different counties, like I said earlier about Carlow. I think it was 2014 when we started with someone in a part-time role, and since gone to a full-time role. When they started, it was very much bottom up. They worked with under 14, 15, 16 development squads, started linking in with the S&C of the minor and under 20, and would have been heavily involved in the recruiting of S&Cs there. But the focus was very much on the younger, the earlier, and linking in with coaches. I think in the counties, say just around me here, Carlow, Wexford, Kilkenny, Laois, all have more or less the exact same role in place. But then if you look at, say, Kerry has Jason McGann, who is with more the senior team, and it filters down from there. I think it's Carborough Calderon in Tipperary, similar, Lucas in Galway hurlers, and Brian Cullen with Dublin footballers. They work at senior intercounty, and they may work with people who are with teams below them, or they give education to people who are, well, not necessarily below them, but in teams who are feeders to that. So very similar, just slightly different ways of implementing it based on what suits the county best.
Yeah, there does seem to be that little bit of difference. I know Roscommon as well they have the similar role as here, in that it looks after the seniors as well as the development squads. It's a funny one to balance, because you can't be hands-on with every team. You can't, it's impossible. I think there's about 12 teams when you look at the academy hurling, football, and then the adult hurling and football. It's impossible to be an S&C coach for 12 teams. It's just not, you just can't do it. So I suppose it's almost a management role, in that you're bringing in people to look after this team and look after, S&C, look after nutrition, look after the different areas, and really put a structure in place that they're all kind of on the same path, or that they know they feed into each other. So whether that works from the bottom up or the top down, maybe it's trying to have a little bit of both. But I do think having the adult and the academies or the youth kind of connected, I think there is a benefit to that. But you also have to be able to manage the workload of it. So it's a bit of a juggling act.
I feel the longer you kind of have that role, though, it'll kind of find its feet a bit of a job, because every kind of county it's nearly new enough, but the longer it goes on, the more data you'll have from all the teams, and the more you'll find what works and what doesn't. So the most important thing is kind of that the county boards commit to the job, rather than just having okay, it didn't work in year one, we'll just scrap it and start from scratch again.
Yeah, exactly. And hopefully that little bit, like with anything, it's something that's going to take that little bit of time. But hopefully, if it's given the time, it will, as you said, get a bit easier as well in terms of, people will take their roles, and it'll be more oversight and management than anything else.
Interesting point you made there, and you're more of a manager, and I think that's kind of in the role, games development administrator. Your previous role was a GPO or games promotion officer. What's some of the big differences between those?
Yeah, it probably is that administrative side of it. I'd say it's probably not a massive difference. Like really, the idea of what you're doing is still the same. You're trying to increase participation. You're trying to educate club coaches. Create a club school link. So those kind of things all stay the same. With the role of a GPO, and again, it kind of varies around county to county. So when I was with Kildare, I worked with an ACE GA club, and that was the only club I had to look after. Now I say only club, there's probably 25 to 30,000 people in NACE, so it's a pretty big club to look after. But yeah, it was just looking after them, so I was out in the schools. There's 7 primary schools, I think, in NACE, 5 secondary schools. So you're coaching in all the schools, you're doing TY courses and things like that in the secondary schools. And then in the club, you're out doing coach visits. They just introduced the tourist program when I was there. So it was getting out and doing coach education, and then going out and visiting each of those teams and working with the coaches there, doing formal coach ed, so your foundation courses, and also doing kind of more informal coach ed, doing workshops and things like that. That is probably still fairly similar as a GDA, but you might have kind of more projects to look after as well. So if you look at Kildare, they have GPOs and GDAs, and the GDAs kind of look after, you might have someone who's looking after cool camps, you might have someone who's looking after go games, someone looking after coach education of your award ones and foundations and things like that. And then the GPOs might have one club, or they might have several clubs depending on the sizes of the different clubs. So there's probably not too much difference between them. Like you'd still have GDAs, would still have clubs that they'd link in with and work with. Probably slightly different here in Sligo in that we have 5 GPOs. And it works on a regional basis. So we have 4 divisions in Sligo, and each GPO has a division. And then we have one hurling GPO, and he looks after hurling within the whole county. So like our GPOs would still probably have those projects. Like here we've Ross looking after coach education. So they still have those projects on top of looking after the clubs. But it might be it's still very, very similar. There's probably not that much difference in them really. It more depends on where you are. Some counties have GPOs, some counties have GDAs, some have a mix of both. The biggest difference I'd see in my role is that it's specifically towards performance, so it gives that element of things where I'm less focused on coaching skills and working with that club school link and things like that.
In that current role, when you're kind of not as much of a focus on coaching the skills and you're focused more on performance, when you're with particularly the squads, or you're educating coaches on what best to do with 13, 14, 15, 16-year-olds, what are your big rocks? Like if you have players coming into the academies or the development squads and you want them to be able to do, aside from football and hurling, A, B, C and D, what are the big things you love to see when they come in they're able to do?
So I suppose for me it's teaching those movement patterns first of all. So it's teaching them how to squat, teaching them how to lunge, how to hip hinge, all those kind of things. Which I try to integrate through their warm-ups as well. So yes, we'll do gym sessions and stuff, but if they're doing those movement patterns on a weekly basis through their training sessions, that they're learning them through there. Jumping and landing mechanics is one that I kind of have a big focus on. I think it's something that it's not really done historically it's not really done, like you don't see it being taught in schools and things like that. So just teaching how to jump and how to land for me is a big one. And then kind of basic running mechanics, and really starting very basic like marching and skipping and things like that. And again, for me, if I have a pitch session with players, that's nearly all done and through the warm up, and a lot of it then trying to educate coaches so that every session those things are being done and they're just part and parcel of what they do.
And do you have any kind of dedicated S&C or athletic development sessions at any stage throughout the year, or is it generally integrated into traditional pitch sessions?
It's usually kind of integrated. Now we might have, so the way say the year would have run last year was you'd have Saturdays would have been our academy days, and you'd have kind of 4 different academy groups coming in on a Saturday morning at different times, and each group might spend 40 minutes in the gym with me and then be out on the field for whether it's 45 minutes or an hour or whatever it is. That would have been kind of the way we would have worked things. So they would have had their specific kind of time with me and then out on the field. That's probably going to change now to be more integrated into being on the field. I don't foresee us being in a gym in big groups anytime soon. So if they're able to be out onto the field, it'll just be integrated through their warm-ups and through their sessions there.
Just on that last point, with the current world we happen to be in at the moment, especially for your teenage athletes there, and I suppose their big developmental years that they're going through, how are you finding the changes to, I suppose, the online programming, the more obviously like over maybe Zoom, like I suppose normally these teenagers, you have them in front of you, you can see what they're doing, or if they're not in front of you, they're in front of other coaches at different times, and technique and just development in general is being noticed, even if it's not being accurately measured, it's being taken note of. How are you finding things with the over the last 12 months to kind of stay on top of that?
Yeah, it's definitely an adjustment. Probably prior to this, I would have been kind of against the whole online coaching side of things, or maybe not even against it, but just wouldn't have kind of gone that direction. Simply because for me, it's so hard to coach. Like I would have kind of had the opinion that, well, you're not really coaching them, you're giving them stuff to do, and sure, that's anybody can give out a program and ask them to do it. And where you get your real benefit is from actually coaching them and, spotting and fixing technique and that kind of thing, and just that general human contact and human conversation. So it's definitely been an adjustment. But it has been working. I think it's not perfect, it's not ideal, but doing the kind of Zoom sessions and things like that, it's given them something, in terms of getting some S&C work done. You can coach to a certain extent. It's definitely not the same, but you can, as long as they have cameras on, you can see what they're doing. You can still give cues to fix technique and things like that. So it's working. It's not ideal, but I definitely think it's better than not doing anything with them.
Just for their physical development, or like, is there some of the team unity there? Like, I know it's really hard to actually get them chatting when it's that big group of however many, but even just seeing each other and realizing we're all doing something together.
Yeah. Even just a mental health kind of side of it, and giving them a break from sitting on the computer looking at classes, or doing school through Teams or through Zoom. I do think they're not necessarily having a chat on it, and you definitely have the sense that some of them are very conscious that they're on a screen and don't want to turn cameras on and things like that. So there's definitely the challenge of trying to get past that, but it does kind of, hopefully for them, give them something to look forward to in the evening, and the fact that they're gonna see each other even if they're not having a full-on conversation with each other.
One of the big things we want to get you on for, Louise, was the GAA's relatively new sports science working group that you're a member of. Can you just give us kind of a bit of an overview of what it is in general? I know it's headed up by Dr. Aoife Lane there from Athlone IT, but just the general gist of it.
Yeah, so I suppose there's a few different areas to it, but the overall kind of view is to really kind of develop a framework for sports science within Gaelic games. So for men and for women, which is brilliant, and kind of to cover the whole pathway. So it's looking at that framework for sports science from, you know, that young nursery age group right the way up to adult, and then also incorporating your elite side of things, your academies, and your senior intercounty teams as well. Looking at more the athletic development side of it. So I think there's about 6 or 7 different strands. Athletic development is one of them, and really for us it's feeding into that and, you know, doing work to hopefully have an impact and, you know, hopefully make some change. And really just the aim, I think, really is to just make some meaningful change based off that framework and on the overall sports science side of things.
I heard an interesting point a few years ago from, I think it was when Pádraig Duffy was Director General of GAA, and he had a meeting with Philip Brown of the IRFU and John Delaney of the FAI, and he said he was so envious of the other two because they're very much the prime ministers of their own country. Like when Philip Brown says something that needs to be implemented in the IRFU, it's done and it's phased down. Whereas Pádraig Duffy says he's trying to control 32 little republics. And even within those 32 little republics, an awful lot of them are split in two. Like sometimes the hurling side and the football side don't speak to each other at all, or the senior intercounty team doesn't speak to the minor intercounty team at all for whatever reason. So to have that overall GA framework there of what is sports science and how can we best use it, what are some of the best practices, and maybe even identifying what are some of the not really worthwhile practices that are out there currently, saying, yeah, let's kind of move people away from some of those.
Yeah, like I think we've all heard the horror stories that are out there, whether, you know, whatever team it might be, whether it's S&C or physio, there's loads of horror stories out there. So I think it is what you said there of kind of making that best practice, you know, making sure everybody knows what that best practice is, and it might be different for different stages of the pathway, and depending on, you know, what club you're with, what team you're with, you know, it's gonna be different for everybody. But it's making sure that those guidelines are out there, and that, you know, I think Aoife said it previously that, you know, to make best practice common practice, and, you know, if we can start to do that, and I think a framework is exactly what's needed to do that, and really just educating coaches, educating players, and hopefully that's something that then kind of transcends across every county.
And they've kind of divided up into, I think you said there are 7 different groups or 7 different disciplines, subgroups even. What are some of those?
Yeah, so I'm not sure. I'm sure I'll forget something, but there's the athletic development, there's nutrition, physiotherapy, there is biomechanics and skill acquisition, psychology and well-being, and I've definitely forgot something. There could be one more, but it's kind of general sports science areas. I suppose there's a lot of different kind of areas in that, but there's so much in each one. Like you take athletic development, there's so much in athletic development on its own, and really they're just all kind of cogs in the wheel, and then you're trying to integrate that into still having the game. So, you know, you got to remember that the game is still at the core of it, and sports science is one element, but because there's so much in it, it's a really important element. And yeah, hopefully through each of those groups there'll be a bit of positive impact on it.
And your specific role is part of the athletic development subgroup. That's led by Des Ryan of Arsenal, is it?
Yeah, Des is the lead of our group, and yeah, he's brilliant. He's, you know, top class at what he does, and he's done a lot of this stuff through Arsenal, and has, you know, he's done frameworks through there for sports science, for athletic development, and I think has been part of it through kind of all areas within Arsenal. So he's the perfect person, I think, to lead up our group, and has huge interest in the GAA, and huge interest in helping. So yeah, it's brilliant even to just be in the group and to kind of learn from him and the other people in the group has been really amazing. Like,
how receptive have county boards been to this development, have you found, or is it still just kind of so fresh that people are kind of dipping their toe in a little bit, or what's been your take on that?
I suppose from the point of view of just being in the group, we haven't really kind of heard that much from them. Now there's kind of a chain with the group, so like we're only one of 6 or 7 groups. The head of each of those groups would meet regularly with Aoife, and then that leads up, I think, into other committees. So it's, you know, it would take a bit of a process for that information to filter through, and really our focus is just working on the athletic development and trying to put some kind of structures in place on that. We've only met about 3 times so far, so we're still kind of in the early stages of it as well. So
when do you expect maybe to start seeing some things not even just reported, but actually being implemented on the ground than with us minions who are coaching little people?
I think that is something that, you know, it's definitely something that's been mentioned that we're conscious of. So obviously this is something that's going to take time. It's probably going to, you know, it's probably going to be something that's happening over a couple of years or even more, a few years. But the idea would be, I think, to kind of have things kind of coming out as they're done. So it's not really a case of let's wait till the end and everything's sorted and tied up in this nice bow and then we'll put it out there. I think it's a case that, you know, when things are ready to be put out, you know, that'll happen along the process, and hopefully, you know, increase buy-in from all those other stakeholders that you were talking about in terms of county boards and clubs across the country and squads and senior teams as well. So it is something that hopefully you will see things come out as it happens.
I'd say having someone of Des's kind of calibre and clout as well will hopefully help things to get implemented sooner rather than later. Like even having something like even Arsenal as the club kind of behind it in some way will kind of hopefully push the GAA to implement things a little bit quicker.
Yeah, and like there's brilliant names in there, like Niall Moyne is in our group as well, and I think he might be leading up another group. You know, you have, you know, I'm not going to name everybody out because I'll definitely forget people, but there's, you know, there's top class people in areas of what they do, and you know, a lot of kind of high profile names as well. So getting that information out there, and you know, Aoife's been speaking about things as well. You know, there's articles out there on it, and podcasts and stuff. So the more information that is feeding out, and you know, hopefully that'll create more awareness and more clarity on what's happening, and hopefully, you know, increase buy-in towards it.
It obviously is going to take a while before it's fully implemented. Like if you even think like at a local level, you may have a few coaches or a manager who are very eager to implement best practice almost immediately, and often already are. But to make it commonplace and make it, I suppose, club, what's the right word here? Anyway, common practice anyway by a club, it takes a while for it to be fed into some chairman and some committee levels for it to be fully recognised as, yes, this is the best way forward, as opposed to what we've previously done. And that's going to be a mixture of coming down from a framework from Croke Park that's fed in, while at the same time grassroots are implementing it. And like oftentimes there, it can actually be the committee level that has the very last to embrace it. But if it is coming from both sides, then hopefully it's more likely to be implemented long term.
Yeah, exactly. It does take time. Like even, you know, from my own role here in Sligo, it's taken I'd say the full first year up until now really for me to see kind of some of the work that's been done, to see that kind of starting to take shape, and you're slowly starting to see people kind of go, oh yeah, that's actually working. That's, you know, there might be some change because of that. You know, it's almost sometimes people have to feel it before they can really see that it's having an impact. So yeah, it's definitely going to take time. Some people are going to buy into it quicker than others, but hopefully it'll make an impact. I really think it will. Like, I think the amount of people that are working on this, the people that are involved, I think it's something that will make an impact, and hopefully it'll make an impact over a course of time, as opposed to just waiting for that big hit towards the end.
Part of it will probably be a case of like one or two teams, I was going to say probably will, but probably already have really embraced sports science, aren't just fully driven by it, but like Orla said a couple of weeks ago, are informing their decisions with the backup of sports science. I'll be shocked if Dublin are not. I'll be shocked if Limerick hurlers are not, plus a few more. And as we see them reap the benefits of that, more and more teams are like, what's their secret? And it's not actually a secret, it's just being informed by best practices out there.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just educating them what those best practice situations are. I think that's really key.
Yeah, I'm just trying to slightly veer them away from a couple of the cowboy situations then as well. But you're never going to eliminate and you're never going to keep everyone away from. It's just trying to reduce that and have structures in place to like stop them, I don't know, exploiting the system or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Damien, anything else you want to hop in with there?
No, that's actually been fantastic. You've covered everything in a lot more detail than I thought we'd get into, which is fantastic. So it's just great to see, I suppose, the positions you're in and the development that's going on, because it's probably something. It is something that's been, sought after for quite some time. So it is great to see these dials moving a bit in, I suppose, keeping up with the times a little bit, and kind of just putting the education of our own sports science and in the areas of like nutrition, strength conditioning, kind of psychological well-being, and all these things, that they're actually starting to drop their way into the GAA. It's a very positive thing, and I can only see it resulting in improvements in the sport in general. So it's very positive.
Yeah, like, I think it is going in the right direction, and hopefully it can continue to do that across all those areas that you mentioned. Hopefully that it'll continue, but I think we're going in the right direction.
I think the performance GDA roles are something that will become far more, they actually are, I'd say about half the counties have now, but they're going to become far more commonplace as we move forward. Like, the media will hear and make a big deal of a Brian Cullen who's full-time with a county team, or someone else who's full-time with the senior, and maybe drips down a bit. But there's so much of that in place already, and like it's going to have, you might not see the benefits of that immediately, but 5 or 6 years down the line you certainly will. And while a lot of the popular media outlets don't know about these, I think the work that's being done is far more important than often the plaudits they get or just the credit they get in general. So I think they're definitely going to grow, and particularly as we get more of a handle on what the specific roles are and what they entail.
Yeah, I like as you said, there is quite a few of those positions out there now, and it's definitely having an impact. Like, I think you look at Kildare, Paul Divley's been there for the last number of years in the role, and it's probably only in the last few years that really you're seeing that impact. So it does take time, and it takes having faith in those people to do the work, and that trust them, that they know what they're doing, and that when they get through kind of a few years of it, it's going to start showing progress and improvements, and really just kind of trust in the process, really.
And some of the other little knock-on benefits I just kind of notice as well is, particularly in Carlow, when like Michael Keogh was the first to do it, followed by Damien Byrne and Seamus Comfort, they just brought an, I suppose, a sense of professionalism or a little bit more organisation to training sessions, and that had a big knock-on effect then on the rest of us as skill coaches. Like, we were far more prepared in planning out our sessions in advance, and we were far more likely to like have not just a plan for the session, but a plan for the next 4 sessions and how they lead into each other. And it kind of brought all of our coaching on quite a bit. Louise, that's been absolutely excellent. Thanks a million for your time. Is there anything you want to plug? Will you have a minute or two, or where can we find out a bit more information or anything like that?
I'm on Twitter and Instagram, and that's about it. We also have a YouTube channel with Sligo Coaching and Games, that we've loads of kind of resources up with videos of exercises, lots of skills stuff as well. We have a few webinars and things on there as well if you want to check that out. But yeah, no, that's about it. Thank you very much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Lovely, and thank you very much for your time, Louise.